Hello citizens and welcome back. In today's video I want to talk about small features that would be a major improvement to our quality of life and gameplay. As always, if you like this video, sacrifice a like and a comment to the YouTube algorithm and subscribe for more. And here's a shout out to our amazing patrons for their support of the channel and the Armory. So a few weeks ago I put out a question to the community on X. I asked what would be small features that would improve quality of life and gameplay in Star Citizen. And I got some pretty interesting replies, so I added those to a few ideas of my own, and I would like to hear your ideas in the comments as well, because I believe that there are many small things that CAG can do that would improve the quality of life and gameplay in Star Citizen, besides fixing bugs. So let's start with the first idea, which is emergency rooms. At the moment, if you're injured and need healing, you have a few options. You could call up a friend with a medical ship with the sufficient facilities, or you might own one yourself. Your other option is to go to a hospital or a clinic. And here is my problem. In order to get medical attention, you have to go interact with a screen and then walk to a room, which in city hospitals usually requires an elevator ride. And while this is nice, I think it's a bit too much if you have a tier 3 injury and want to get back to whatever you were doing. I think it would be nice if every clinic and hospital had a small emergency room with a few tier 2 or tier 3 medical beds that players can freely use without needing to use a screen or an elevator. In my experience, rather than going through the whole screen and elevator process, most players will simply land at the city or station and hit backspace, which seems to be way faster. And until the death of the spaceman is implemented, I don't think this is going to change. However, users over on X highlighted a feature that I forgot about. Let's say that your friend got incapacitated and you don't have a medgun or a medpen to wake them up. What you can do is drag or tractor beam them onto a ship and then fly to any city, because every hangar has a medical elevator that will take any incapacitated occupants to the hospital. I feel like this is a very underutilized feature. CAG could change it so that it transports any injured characters to the hospital, not just the unconscious ones. But I feel like this opens up an opportunity to players to abuse this system to shorten travel time between the spaceport and the city. Moving on, one of the most requested features I see on Spectrum and generally in the Star Citizen community, and that is night vision. I think this one is pretty self-explanatory. Anytime you go do anything planetside in Star Citizen, you have a pretty solid chance it's going to be dark. And helmet and gun flashlights don't cut it sometimes. I think night vision would even be useful for flying at times. Even with the recent updates to ship headlights, I think most are too weak or don't shine far enough. It has gotten to the point where players are trying to emulate night vision using reshade, so I think it's about time CAG created a proper version in-game. I understand that there are some balance considerations, but it seems like a reasonable request. Originally, I had hoped that night vision would be a part of the visor rework coming in 3.23, but so far that doesn't seem to be the case. Next, landing cameras. Now, most players, including myself, will switch to the external camera when landing their ship. However, I think it would be pretty nice if the MFDs in our ships had some sort of a landing mode that would help guide you properly onto the landing pad or hangar. Personally, I think that Elite Dangerous does a great job with this, and I would be very interested in seeing something similar in Star Citizen. Technically, we did have a beginning to this feature a few years ago when CAG briefly introduced flight tunnels to landing zones. Many of you might not remember it, but for one patch we were forced to fly in and out of landing zones using holographic tunnels. This wasn't very popular with the players for obvious reasons, but I think it had potential which was wasted on a half-baked feature. But let's move on to opening ship ramps and elevators remotely from outside of the ship. You know the situation, you want to load the ground vehicle onto your ship, but you don't want anyone getting in while you're at the terminal. So you get out, close the ramp, and go, and then come back with the ground vehicle, get out, open the ramp, get back in, drive inside, get out, and close the ramp behind you, which is a bit tedious. Now, 3.23 offers a partial solution in the form of the engineering console, which allows the user to open and close doors remotely. So if you have a friend up in the cockpit, they can open and close the ramp for you. But as far as we know, at the time of writing, you won't be able to do this on your own. I think this could be addressed with a simple app in your Mobby Glass that would allow you to open exterior doors and ramps on nearby ships. This could even extend to a remote engineering app that would allow you to manage the systems on your ship remotely. This might be useful even while you're on the ship performing damage control, because it would allow you to check the status of components and rooms without having to return to the console. And finally, vending machines. They're everywhere, in real life and in Star Citizen. But in Star Citizen, for some reason, they still don't work. I feel like this should have been implemented a long time ago. For example, instead of the Area 18 coffee vendor, which doesn't work. It's not that there aren't enough locations for players to buy food and drinks, but generally speaking, vending machines are in a very convenient location pretty much everywhere, which might save you an elevator trip in some cases, which is always nice. And for me personally, it feels like a massive missed opportunity that wouldn't require a lot of work to exploit. But speaking of saving elevator trips, many people mentioned that they would like to see stairs in some locations where we have elevators. And while this is a nice idea, it's not going to work. Elevators are simply necessary. It has mostly to do with the fact that most locations in Star Citizen are massive, and elevators are a good way to connect various parts of those locations. There is also a technical reason. Having two areas be connected with an elevator means that these two areas can theoretically be two separate object containers, which allows these areas to be loaded and unloaded independently. If you would like to know more about how that works, go check out my video on server meshing. But since CIG made elevators faster a few patches ago, they haven't been that much of an issue for me. Sure, they don't work sometimes, but that has more to do with server health rather than the elevators themselves. But what I would much rather see replaced are the winding corridors at the new Babbage and Orison spaceports. Until the custom scanners and terminals are implemented, I don't think there is a particularly good reason to have these corridors here, especially since everyone just sprints through them. Though it is possible that this is done to improve performance by restricting how much the player can see, which reduces the number of objects that have to be rendered. But I think it's much more likely that this is just intended to slow down the players going through that area, which is not very effective, and it would be a time sink that we don't need. And with that being said, that's all for today. Ultimately, I feel like most of what I mentioned today is a fairly easy task to implement, and it might be worthwhile for CIG to look into it. Of course, bug fixes are also an important way of improving quality of life, but it's not always possible to fix all the bugs. But what do you think? What other small features or improvements would make your life in Star Citizen easier? Let me know in the comments. Thank you for watching, fly safe, and I will see you in the verse.